Welcome everyone in this room, but also at home. You're a guest at the Theosophical Society Point Loma, founded by Madame Blavatsky in 1875. We are an independent study center for search for truth, entirely run by volunteers. And what we study and what we look into is Theosophia. It is a universal truth and therefore encompasses all grand world religions and philosophies. And it works with three ground principles or hypotheses. Boundlessness is one, cyclicity is the second, and fundamental growth and equality is the third. These principles can be seen as natural axioms that form the foundation on which all truth knowledge is built. More about these principles you will hear in this lecture. Now first some practical information, because you're here in a lecture, and from what time till which time does it last? We start at 2 o'clock, so now, and we have a break in about 2:45, and then we end at 4 o'clock, so 2 parts. After each part we have room for questions, and of course, in between, questions are fine too if something is unclear. And after the lecture, we have plenty of time to talk as well. And furthermore, during the break, feel free to walk around and look around, because we have an information table over here where you can read more about who we are and what we do. At the back of the room, you find books and a magazine in which a lot of knowledge we've built up can be read. And when you go down the corridor at the back, we have a library. And there are a lot of books there too, also very old ones we don't publish here, but they're there to read. And of course, behind me, you've already seen it probably, you have facilities to get some coffee or tea. So let's start with the lecture. And so if you have questions in between, I will try to answer them, and otherwise Herman Vermeulen will help me answer them. Okay, so sustainability. Sustainability is a hot topic. And when I started thinking about this lecture, I thought about what I know about sustainability, but also how society goes about this theme. And I realized that we actually see a whole lot of sustainability-related instructions that tell us about what we should, but also what we should not do. So things like reduce CO2 emissions, recycle, repair, minimize synthetic clothing because of the microfibers that pollute the oceans. And there are a lot more to think of. But we actually barely talk about the core of sustainability. So the background from which those instructions derive. There are a lot of sustainability-related instructions that align our actions with the world in which we live. But the key question is whether we contribute sustainably in this way. Because instructions without knowing the background are actually not very sustainable. Without knowing that background of instructions, we cannot, for example, update them independently when circumstances change. When you look at this sign, for example, I have no idea what is behind this instruction. So when circumstances change, I have no idea when I could do something different. But also, I cannot think of new or better instructions because I don't know what this is about. And also, I cannot show others why this instruction is good to follow because I don't know this background. So sustainability requires insight and discernment. And sustainability from this perspective is actually about more than just CO2 emissions and climate change. It's about going back to that basis, that foundation from which instructions spring. And today I would like to talk with you about that basis of sustainability. This insight provides you with a vision on which you can stand and which helps you to come to your own sustainable actions and choices. So sustainability is about thinking and acting in harmony with the long term. And when we think of the long term, what do we have to deal with, is what I was thinking. That is with life. Because life is all around us, in the sense of living beings, such as people, animals, plants, bacteria, the globe itself, but also as in a living together, working together, now and in the future. And in this living together, beings can hinder each other by taking more than necessary or creating blockades for each other. But living beings can also stimulate each other by supporting each other or giving space to live and grow. So the nature of our interaction with other living beings, therefore, determines whether we are acting sustainably or not. And this makes understanding life extremely important. And that is why we think and believe that a vision on life is the sustainable basis for sustainable action. To have insight in how life works and interacts with each other. This also explains the spiritual perspective that is on the flyer of this lecture. We mean by this insight in that bigger picture, insight into the coherence of all living things. And we will continue on this, but before we really start, I will show you what we're going to talk about today. So first we start with the question, what is life? Then we zoom into the collaboration of life. And from that will flow the idea of what is sustainable. Then we have a break around 2:45. Then we zoom into that human influence that we will touch before the break a bit already as well. And then we look with that sustainable mentality with which we get from that first part. We will zoom into some sustainable examples. So this first part, I will share with you a perspective on life. And this is mainly theory, but we will survive. And the second part is a bit more practical. So we will use that perspective I share with you in the first part to look at those examples. So let's start by investigating what life is. And to start with, I have a video for you that kind of stimulates the imagination about the width and depth of life. I muted the video because the sound is a bit annoying. In this video, we will zoom out and we will look at what we've discovered with science so far. So we zoom out of the Earth. Beyond our solar system. Beyond our Milky Way, of which we are part. So this is as far as we've seen so far. And then we zoom back in. And then we actually go in to see the smallest parts we've seen so far with science. And there we have it. That's the smallest part we've seen so far. And we actually know that beyond this, there will be more to discover. And also with the greatness of life, we will discover even more. So this video stretches our view on life. Because usually in life, we are in this room, for example, now with people around us, and we are actually not always so aware of that great depth and width of life. So this video only shows us what we can actually perceive with our visual senses. And we humans are limited, as is all life. Let's see, my cursor. For example, or this is a small example, this is the mantis shrimp. And this mantis shrimp is actually a very, peculiar creature, because he can perceive a larger spectrum of vibration than we do, or than humans do. And this does not sound very exciting, but that does mean that the mantis shrimp can perceive more colors than we do. Ultraviolet, deep red, and polarized light. And he can perceive those colors also with those flaps. They can actually communicate with each other with that. And you also see that his eyes are very different. They actually have two half orbs, and in the middle they have a band, and each part of that eye has its own pupil, or do you say it like that, pupil? The black, yeah, well, he has 6 of them, and they're actually very incredible eyes to look at when you zoom into them. And those vibrations that the mantis shrimp can perceive and we can't, there are other species that can perceive other vibrations as well, such as birds. Because some birds that are apparently black to us can be very colorful to other birds that can perceive those colors or those vibrations. And we are actually only talking about color here, which we perceive with our eyes. A tiny part of bandwidth of all vibration that can be perceived. And think here of sound frequencies, but also thought frequencies. And this ties in with the next topic I would like to discuss, which is boundlessness. So this is, as I already told you before, one of the universal hypotheses or principles of Theosophia. And these hypotheses were presented by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. She was, as I said already, a very important person in Theosophy, because she founded this society in 1875. And the idea is that these hypotheses together form the foundation on which all true thought is based, whether scientific, philosophical, or religious. And from a theosophical point of view, you could therefore use these principles as touchstones to check whether something is true and thus sustainable. Are actions and thoughts not in harmony with these 3 principles, then, based on these 3 principles, you can ask yourself whether the action or thought is true and thus sustainable. And of course, this is something for everyone self to investigate. And you should definitely not take this just as a truth like that. Otherwise, we would be on that path of the instructions I told you earlier. So it's very important to investigate these thoughts for yourself. Check them, test them, in order for wisdom to grow in yourself. So the idea is that these 3 hypotheses are universal. This means that they apply to everything, including life. And about life, we said that a right view on it is the basis for sustainable thought and action. So let us look at these 3 hypotheses and how they can contribute to our view on life. So the first one is boundlessness. And there are a number of thoughts connected to this principle. That there's no absolute beginning or end from which you can draw the conclusion that everything is one, otherwise there would be boundaries. Everything is existent everywhere and always. Nothing can be created or destroyed, so everything is essentially eternal. And infinite duration, which means an infinite now or eternal now. So think of our ability to learn, infinite creativity, and also infinite depth when that we experience when we look inside our souls. Also the video that is infinite in depth and width. So we can discover infinitely more in science. But when we discover something, it doesn't mean that we create something new. It was already there. We just discovered it. So what can we say about life from this perspective? That life is essentially boundless. Life has infinite potential. And from this principle, the connectedness of all life is a fact. All life is part of that boundlessness and is at its core the boundless. In essence, life is boundless and eternal. And on the outside, it doesn't really look that way. On the outside, it looks as if life is temporary. And that has to do with the following principle, which is cyclicity. This principle is about periods of activity and rest. So everything that lives is boundless in essence. And the idea is that living beings, as sparks of the boundless, periodically express themselves and withdraw again. Think of the changes that plants go through with the seasons, our sleeping and waking, dying and being born again. And Blavatsky calls the driving force behind all life consciousness, that it is consciousness which wraps itself up in matter and rolls out again, like a breathing in and breathing out. And that there is self-awareness from a human level, which means that when human consciousness is expressed in a body, it can reflect on itself. That it can be conscious of oneself, of one's thoughts and actions. And seen from this principle, we can say that life is subject to cyclicity. Consciousness expresses itself and withdraws again. So in order to form a better picture of these three hypotheses, let's apply them to the context of the Earth, where we live. The Earth is a living being composed of other life. We are part of it, but also animals, plants, bacteria, atoms, and so on. And together with these other life forms, we are the living whole, the living whole Earth. And all this life contributes cyclically to this living whole. And think of all the ecosystems and cycles of Earth, on Earth. The water cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, food cycle. On all of these cycles, and there are so much more cycles that I can't even pronounce all here, there are a tremendous amount of living entities involved that make these cycles work. And with that, contribute to the living whole. For example, the nitrogen cycle, we consist for about 3% out of nitrogen. And we need nitrogen to make our bodies work. And there's a vast amount of nitrogen in the air, but we just can't squeeze it like that in our bodies. It has to be divided into smaller particles. And we can't do this on our own, but some bacteria and fungi can do this with the help of a special biological enzyme, of which there's only one. They break open the nitrogen, the bacteria and fungi add the particles to the water, plants absorb these particles, we eat the plants, and that way nitrogen gets into our bodies. We use the particles for amino acids, which contribute to proteins, which ultimately contribute to our entire bodies, because proteins create cells and such. Eventually, we excrete nitrogen again, and from that point on, the whole cycle starts again. This is, of course, a very materialistic example, but it does show the principle of cooperation and how we use each other, how we collaborate with each other. Not only we use this cycle, but all biological life uses this cycle that needs nitrogen, which is pretty impressive cooperation. This cycle is a cycle, but there are also other cycles, but we just tend to forget them because they're so natural to us. Think of the Earth that rotates around its axis in 24 hours, which causes day and night. We generally join in this by sleeping at night and waking in day. Our skin renews itself every few years. The tides that we have, the habits of birds that traveled around the whole world. During these cycles, life contributes to the living whole. And in this process, each individual life expands its consciousness. This means that every time individual life starts with the cycle again, it has advanced a little further than where it ended last time. Life on Earth is a living whole. Everything carries each other and cannot exist without each other. This requires a constructive contribution from everything it is composed of. About this contribution, we will talk a bit later on, but first our question, what is life? If we take these three hypotheses as a basis for our view on life, what can we say about it? Life is, from that view, two things. First is that it is consciousness that develops together with further and less developed life. And when we zoom into this a little deeper, we can also say about life that it is an infinite growth process. Which starts with being aware that you are part of a larger whole, that as a part you work together with other parts, other living beings, and in this process you learn and expand your boundless consciousness until you have reached the point that there's no difference between you and the larger whole anymore. You realize that you are this larger whole, that you're one with it. And from that point on, From that point on, the cycle starts again, but at a higher level of consciousness, because a larger whole is part of an even larger whole, to infinity. And this process takes place in large cycles, but also in small cycles. In large, our development as a human being over lifetimes on Earth, but also in smaller cycles. Think of that collaboration thing I talked about, what Mandela said, about at first you see yourself standing apart from someone or your enemy. While working with that person, the distinction between you and the other person disappears. You get to know him and recognize that there's no difference between you and the other. Both of you share that common boundless cyclical quest of life and of growth. And with insight into what life is, we have been given a very important key with regard to sustainability. When all life is infinitely developing consciousness, whether it's a plant or human, and contributes and develops together with further and less developed life, then this means that when we're talking about sustainable action, giving space to the development and collaboration of life, people, animals, insects, and so on, plays a very important role. So giving space to the development and collaboration of life. So let's look into what collaboration entails and what role we as humans play in it. And when we add these ideas to our view, we arrive at what is sustainable. So before I talked about further and less developed life, and we're not talking about fundamental or essential differences here. only relative differences in growth that depend on a point of view. So life that is further developed than we are, we call spiritual, and life that is less developed, we call matter. And every life, whether spiritual or material, radiates an atmosphere that influences less developed beings. The idea is that spiritual life stimulates and inspires material life to develop. Think, for example, of the atmosphere that a manager can have or radiate. He can offer the opportunities or possibilities for his employees to contribute and develop. But that is not always the case. It can also be a direct colleague who is a source of inspiration for other colleagues. Every living being radiates an atmosphere. And because of this, all living beings carry a responsibility. Every living being determines, consciously or unconsciously, the quality of its atmosphere. And every living being, therefore, determines, consciously or unconsciously, whether it stimulates or hinders other living beings. So then we can ask ourselves a question, what about a human being and the atmosphere he radiates? Human beings have many similarities with other life, but what mainly makes us different from other life is that we have an active mind, active thinking, and self-awareness. This means that we have the ability to consciously focus our thinking. Depending on how we focus our thinking, we receive thoughts. And according to those thoughts, we act in the world. And we can focus our thinking on various aspects. Namely, and to the left you have the English terms, to the right you have Sanskrit terms. If you want to know more of them, you can use those words to look them up. So it starts with the sense of oneness. When someone knows himself one with the living whole and can focus on this. Insight is when we focus on our thinking on deep insight, deep understanding, having the overview and seeing coherence. Intellect is the objective and analytical kind of thinking, the one we know thinking best by in society. So we can use intellect to unravel problems and try to put things in mental boxes to be able to comprehend and understand them. Desire is the kind of thinking where someone wants to achieve something, material or spiritual, for themselves or for a larger whole. It's neutral, as are all of them, by the way. Vitality is the kind of thinking that is full of energy, energy that you can use to achieve things. But if it is not guided properly, it can also lead to impulsive thinking. Emotion, when we focus our thoughts on emotions, feelings, and that attracts thoughts that are colored with anger, happiness, sadness, or perhaps joy. And physical thinking, when we focus our thinking on the physical, it attracts thoughts such as I'm thirsty or I'm warm. And these thinking aspects are in a specific order, where the higher aspects point to the spiritual life and lower aspects point towards material life. When we focus on spiritual thinking aspect, we spread our consciousness. We step beyond ourselves. Then we are inquisitive, sincerely want to gain insight and to know ourselves with everything around us. It really expands. It goes beyond ourselves. And when we focus on material thinking aspect, we narrow our consciousness. We focus on our body, our own feelings. And for the sake of clarity, according to this philosophy, all thinking aspects are needed. In fact, we have to use all of them. What I'm trying to say is that it is very important what we are led by. So we need all of these aspects, but when we let ourselves be led by emotion, you get a different result than when you let yourself be led by a higher aspect. For example, when we let ourselves be led by vitality, we do before we think. At least that's the way we talk about it usually. When you have a project with others, for example, you can be very impulsive and make decisions before actually consulting them with others. Or when we let ourselves be led by emotion, you get angry when someone is late for an appointment. You could also ask the other, create understanding by asking what is going on or what was up, why the person is late. When a certain aspect is leading, the others become supportive. So when we let ourselves be led by insight, for example, we can use our intellect to support those insights. And we can use vitality to put those insights into practice. So our focus determines our way of thinking. And our way of thinking determines our actions. The focus of our thinking determines the entire atmosphere we radiate. Focusing on insight and oneness of life leads to expanding consciousness. It makes us connect with other life, which we simultaneously inspire and influence positively at the same time. We can therefore make our constructive contribution to that living whole by focusing on insight and oneness. And this brings us to what is sustainable. It is sustainable when we focus on the most sustainable thinking aspect and act accordingly. Physical thinking, for example, is less sustainable because when we have an appetite and eat something, our appetite is satisfied. And regarding emotions, when we get angry with someone, we can regret it an hour later. But insight remains with us for the rest of our lives. When we have real insight in true values in life, this has impact on how we organize our lives, how we go about with other life, and how we do our work, for example. It is therefore important that we, as human beings, focus our thinking on what is sustainable, deep understanding of the essential and coherence of life. And we can do this only ourselves. Nobody can do this for us. Because we are the only ones to decide for ourselves, to sincerely explore and get to the essential core of everything around us, so that we gain that insight that helps us to act and live harmoniously. So in practice, sustainability means a continuous exercise to see the essential of life and a constant striving to be that constructive force in the living whole. And this is a hand-in-hand process. During the practice of life, we stay focused on insight and oneness, and through which our insight grows and our consciousness expands. We apply these deepened insights of life with which we support that living whole, and through the application of those insights, we learn in collaboration with other life. So it's a cycle, and it's actually an upwinding cycle. Effects of a sustainable mentality are therefore respect for all life, give what you can, taking into account the impact of our thoughts and actions on the whole, take only what is necessary, and by not taking more, you give other life the space to make its contribution and to develop. And this is the end of part 1. I do have a summary for you. So in a nutshell, the main points I've shared with you are that every living being is essentially boundless consciousness. Every living being develops its boundless consciousness in cooperation with other life, so it's expanding consciousness. Every living being radiates an atmosphere that influences other living beings. Man determines the quality of his atmosphere by focusing his thinking, and it is sustainable when man focuses on insight and oneness and acts accordingly. In part 2, I will share a different perspective on thinking, based on the same thoughts, but a different angle. And we will look at a few concrete examples of sustainability, based on that sustainable mentality. But before we start the break, I would want to give you some room for questions.
About?
The contents of the lecture so far. Yeah.
Why it's not taught in schools? Primary schools.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Before the age of 11, before the personality of our future generation is created.
Yeah, well, I think...
Is it possible through your company, I don't know what you people are, but is it possible to send it to onderwijs part as a program? Because then we will not have violent kids who will hit the dog on the street. Then we will not have stealing, because everybody will have what he needs to have without having desire for what he is not able to have.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will not have territorial conflicts, we will not have wars. That's so simple.
Yeah.
But that should be seeded in young generation before 11 years, because then it's late. It's late to seed it now on me, because I developed it in myself when I was 5.
Mm.
And all of you, I think, as you people are joined here together and all of you are doing like this, it means that you agreed. But sorry, we are dumb. We can do nothing more with it. This should be given to young generation before 11 years.
I totally agree, and I think all of us here agree on that the contents of this should be in primary schools. Actually, all of education, I think, should be the basis of education. But I think that we have a...
natuurkundige, toch? It is kundige, geography or something, or yeah, nature.
The thing is that our focus is on this, but the focus of the people in education in schools should be similar as well. And I think that if the focus of people is not on this, they don't preach it, they don't radiate it, they don't emit that atmosphere we're talking about.
How can we support it to give it to onderwijs program?
Did you want to?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah.
May I comment maybe? I think for children, kids, the brain is not yet developed to understand this matter. That's my idea.
I do think they have it in them. I think it's their basis, but perhaps they can't reason yet about it, perhaps.
Yeah. This is what probably children everywhere learn from their grandparents and from their village. Mm-hmm. If you look at every single one of these, children would have heard this from Oma or Opa or Tanti or whoever. Don't waste, don't hit, don't do any of these things. Be kind to other people. And that's what we don't have. I think we've lost that. And it must be the private, not the school, that brings it back. It has to be a matter of values, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I agree and respect your opinion, because I was raised by grandmother and grandfather. Because that's why I say that I had it since I had it.
Yeah.
Mm.
But our grandmothers and grandfathers now, they, especially in the Netherlands, there is no boundary between grandfathers and grandmothers the way I had in Ukraine, because I lived together. And my grandmother, by baking for me, she was teaching me don't throw away food.
Yeah, we don't.
Because in 1933, my mother didn't have food, but she survived, and that's why you received life. So now we are lost in at all the generation, and if alarms will not be rang at this age, then in 20 years we are just done. We are just done, because iPhones and iPods will take over, that's all.
No, I don't want to respond to that again, but I mean, what I was going to say earlier, my wife said, the way we were raised by parents, grandparents, I've recently read an article and I was very stunned by that, is I have believed that it's not just what we're passed on by our ancestors, but that we have an innate knowledge of what you're talking about. Because when you actually watch children, before they develop the intellect, the way they interact, they cooperate in their play. And they haven't been taught to cooperate. It is us adults who've actually taught them that they need to compete, and they actually get that taught from the moment they go to play school. I mean, when I was a kid, maybe it started when we were at school, but I think that is what we're wrong. We can still learn something if we actually observe children, how they interact, and it comes so natural to them that all our intellectual talk, I mean, when you talked about instructions, I figured instructions are just in a straitjacket, right? I mean, please allow me to express how I experience something, and let's share on that level.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Agreed. Yeah.
The fundamental topic is ethics. Behind everything.
Is
so
it?
If you don't have a clear view on ethics in a broader perspective, then also this story will not land. So that is the fundamental thing, and everyone, also a child, can understand it, but also adults should be able to understand it. So that's it has to do with the three propositions you started with.
Yeah, I think it's I do think we're actually all saying the same thing, that it is a very basic view on life, which is very innate indeed in children, I think. And whether we call it ethics or values, or it's that vision you have on what is essentially important in life, which you carry out, I think. And in a way, we're actually talking about that very thing, all of us, I think. We have that same view on it. But the question is, of course, how do we spread that in the world? Because we don't see it everywhere. But it also, that is, I think, where we all have that responsibility. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. We have to, if we see it that way, we have to radiate that ourselves as well. And I'm not saying that we aren't doing that. I think we as people are sitting here are doing that, but it makes it extremely important. And I will tell something in part 2 about that as well, why it is so important. I already told something about life influencing each other. And I think that is part of a key as well, that we spread those ideas, and that when people are able to grasp them, they will grasp them and take them with them in their radiation. Yeah.
I love the word radiates. It's connected to 26 April 1986, the year when I was born, 200 kilometers far away from Chernobyl. So that's why I'm radiating it.
You're a glow.
Okay. Are there any more questions, or yes?
Yes, that's sustainability. What you're talking about, is that the same what is now in society understood by that sustainability? Because they think it's for the climate, they want to have to sustain it.
Yeah.
Also for things we have, a car need to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And for houses need to be sustainable, but they are, I think, quite different from what you are talking in this.
Yes, and that is
until now.
Exactly why I didn't choose that kind of sustainability, because when I looked into the definition of it, there are so many definitions of what sustainability is. And when I started thinking about it, I thought, well, all of them are actually a sort of, how do you say it, derivation of derivative? Yeah, from actually that core of yourself having a view on life and doing your actions, and actually all of those instructions, for example, come from your own view. So that is why I thought actually your own mentality and view on life and the things you do, you think and act is actually the most sustainable way of creating sustainability, when you have the right focus in that. Yeah. Yeah, but there are a lot of those things of sustainability of cars, of houses, or whatsoever are actually also in that same direction, because when you think of a sustainable house, you don't want to use too much water, you want to have a careful way of going about with heat, all those kind of things. And they're actually in the same way, but they're a bit more on the surface. They're not that deep. That's the only difference in a way, I think. Yeah.
I wonder if it is right to spend so many money for this type of sustainability. Yeah? What is actually going on? Yeah? They want to spend a lot of money to make cars, climate, houses more sustainable.
And my idea is that when we don't change the mentality, it's all symptomatic. You're actually fighting the symptoms, and in a way that's necessary for that level, but I think the best way of treating sustainability is at the core of the way how people perceive the world and how they act in the world. And that is a right mentality, I think, that is necessary. Yeah. Is it time for a break? Mm-hmm. And that we continue around 3, I think, or perhaps a bit later, we'll see. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we continue. Oh, it's very faded out, I see. But we've covered the question, what is life? Or at least part of it, because there's so much more to say about what is life. The collaboration of life, and what is sustainable. And in this part, we look at thinking from a different perspective, or the same matter, but from a different angle. And we go to a few sustainable examples and initiatives. So let's start with a bit more visual representation of how our thinking works. In this, man is made visible, including all of his thinking aspects. Perhaps needless to say, but this is a schematic representation. And in reality, nothing of this is also isolated. We are essentially boundless consciousness, and regard that boundless consciousness as white light that contains different colors of the rainbow. And that we humans can perceive those various colors with our thinking. And think of those colors as, or thinking aspects as different selves that can sit behind the steering wheel. And you can choose which self is behind the wheel by your focus. And in the best case, we can totally self-aware and control. We can focus totally controlled and self-aware on any of these aspects, depending on what a situation needs. When we are able to do that, so very self-aware and consciously, we are masters of our thinking, or our thinking faculty. And we can focus on a specific self, which means that we radiate this self. And this can be a mix of multiple selves too. And you could see this radiation as our output. And when we let ourselves be led by higher aspects, we emit above personal output, which stimulates other life. Above personal output is expansive, constructive, and supportive. And when we let ourselves be led by lower aspects, we emit personal output, which rather hinders other lives. Personal output is namely a bit narrowed, more concentrated on your body. And when you let yourselves be led by lower aspects, lower output, and you're in circumstances, you can, for example, you have little insight in a situation because your consciousness is narrowed and you're not expansive. And that can, for example, cause ecosystems to collapse, which we will look into later, some of those examples. So it is very important idea also that personal output can cause more problems because we influence each other with it. by which it multiplies. The same goes, of course, for that higher output, because we radiate it, we can influence other life with it, and that has consequences. So that influencing others, that can happen because next to output, we have also input. We mentioned earlier that all living beings radiate an atmosphere. And that means that we are dealing with atmospheres of other life. For example, the individual atmosphere of a colleague or a partner, but also the sum of those individual atmospheres, such as the atmosphere of a party or organization, this room, for example, or a city or a country. And these individual or group atmospheres rub against us, well, so to speak. And this can cause us to adopt the color of the other atmosphere. In that case, we're influenceable or moldable. The basis for this is that we have insufficient insight in ourselves or the situation around us. And it is therefore important to constantly focus on understanding what is essential in life, so that we are not easily influenced by these atmospheres, but that we can consciously direct our thinking and choose our thoughts. And man does not only carry this responsibility for himself, but for everything that lives in and around him, because he may influence other life with this atmosphere. The self-conscious focus of our thinking, that ability to self-consciously focus, requires self-confidence, the faith that you have it in you, concentration, to keep that inner eye focused on the essential, and discipline, so putting those insights into practice and having perseverance in that. 3 skills that we can carry and practice with us along all our lives. And a lot of inspiration can be gained from nature, which is always consistent and steady, such as plants that continue to grow peacefully and bees that diligently collect nectar. Everything that lives does its job quietly. An insight in those ecosystems and how life supports each other is very inspiring to see. And this brings us to the first example in the field of ecology. Perhaps some of you know him. This is Peter Wolleben, a forest ranger from Germany. He's the man with the tall man with the glasses left on the picture. And not long ago, he contributed to a better understanding of nature by 2 books, The Hidden Life of Trees and The Inner Life of Animals. And he has shown us how trees work together and support each other. And a very nice example of this is the Wood Wide Web. The Wood Wide Web is a large network of tree roots in the ground. And to those tree roots, the tops of them, attach fungi. And these fungi allow the trees to transport nutrients from one tree to another. And the network of these tree roots is enlarged by these fungi. And the fungi are actually supplied with food in this process. And they take quite a large percentage of all of the nutrients. I believe it's about 30. But it is widely used by the trees, for example, when trees are ill. Healthy trees gain a lot with photosynthesis, they create a lot of nutrients, and they pass them on to ill trees to be able to survive. And the same happens with old trees as well. Some trees, Peter told about, don't even have a canopy anymore, so they don't have leaves or whatsoever anymore. But they still exist. They still are able to survive, and that's because of the network. And those old trees have a very large network under the ground, and they actually contribute to that whole unity of trees by that network. So they're still contributing to that larger whole network. And a different example of good collaboration is in the savanna. Trees communicate with each other by means of fragrances, for example. In the savannah, when an acacia tree is eaten by a giraffe, the tree produces a flavor called tannin. We also know them when some fruits are not very ripe, they have this bitter taste. Yeah, they produce that taste or that flavor in the leaves, so the giraffe stops.
To protect themselves.
Yes, to protect themselves. And additionally, the tree produces a fragrance, ethylene, and that is a stress hormone of trees, and they spread that in the savanna for other trees to pick up, because when they pick that stress hormone up, they start producing the tannin instantly, so that when the giraffe decides to stop eating from that one tree, it walks around to other trees that are nearby, and those taste bad as well, so he keeps away from them. Of course, the giraffe is very smart, and when the wind blows a certain way, it goes the other way because the trees didn't get the scent. But anyway, it's pretty clever, and it does show a piece of collaboration. The same actually happens in forests when trees, for example, are eaten by beetles. Another story of this, because what I wanted to show is that there's so much more coherence and dynamics behind what we can perceive with our eyes. There's so much more going about behind what we can perceive, how everything, life, actually carries each other. And an example of this is seen in this next video. Maybe we can switch off the light.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom.
We all know that whales eat fish and krill, and some people, certain politicians in Japan for instance, have argued that killing whales is good for human beings, as it boosts the food available for us to eat. And so you would think. But as the great whales declined, so did the numbers of fish and krill. It seems counterintuitive. Surely their numbers would rise as their major predators disappeared. But it now turns out that whales not only eat these animals, they also keep them alive. In fact, they help to sustain the entire living system of the ocean. Whales feed at depth in waters that are often pitch dark, and then they return to the surface, to the photic zone, where there's enough light for photosynthesis to happen. There they release what biologists call fecal plumes, vast outpourings of poo, punamis. These plumes are rich in iron and nitrogen, nutrients which are often very scarce in the surface waters. And these nutrients fertilize the plant plankton that lives in the only place where plants can survive, the photic zone. Fertilizing the surface waters isn't the only thing the whales do. By plunging up and down through the water column, they also keep kicking the plankton back up into the photic zone, giving it more time to reproduce before it sinks into the abyss. Even today, though whale populations have been greatly reduced, the vertical mixing of water caused by movements of animals up and down through the column of the oceans is astonishingly roughly the same as the amount of mixing caused by all the world's wind and waves and tides. More plant plankton means more animal plankton, on which the larger creatures then feed. In other words, more whales means more fish and krill. But the story doesn't end here, because plant plankton not only feeds the animals of the sea, it also absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. When eventually it sinks to the ocean floor, it takes this carbon out of circulation down to a place where it remains for thousands of years. The more whales there are, the more plankton there is. The more plankton there is, the more carbon is drawn out of the air. When whales were at their historical populations, before great numbers of them were killed, it seems that they might have been responsible for removing tens of millions of tons of carbon from the atmosphere every year. Whales change the climate. The return of the great whales, if they're allowed to recover, could be seen as a benign form of geoengineering. It could undo some of the damage we've done, both to the living systems of the sea and to the atmosphere.
There's another video of this. This is how whales change climate. There's another video called How Wolves Change Rivers. Also very interesting to see, but that one is a bit more known, so I decided to use this one. So the people that hunted whales in this video actually thought they were, well, doing something good for people to get more food. But I think this is a very good example when you do things in nature without having the insight in other life. So life naturally works together and has a dynamic balance. And we can steer and intervene in this, but we also have the responsibility to do this harmoniously. And more often than not, when humans interfere somewhere or intervene, we do a lot of damage, but that is usually because we don't have the insight in the situation there. So we have limited insight. And this shows how important it is to focus on that insight together with other life. We are that living whole that supports life, and our actions with life should be in accordance with that. So, a next topic I want to go to, because I think this video says a lot on its own, is production. People who show well what it can mean to think and act from a holistic vision are Thomas Rau, architect, and Sabine Oberhuber, whom I couldn't find a free picture, open picture. And they say that after all, our Earth is so much more than the sum of its parts. It's a living, rhythmic, cyclical system, a unity, and that is how we must treat it. And they looked at our current economy from this angle and thought of a model that takes this holistic view into account. And this new model is called Turn 2. The model is made in line with natural processes in nature, cyclicity, reuse of those materials, for example, and the ability of recovery. So let's first look at our current economy. Our current economy is a linear economy. We mine materials, make products, use them, and when they are end of life, we throw them away as waste. And this system creates poor quality products that break down quickly because manufacturers don't benefit from quality. More sales, more profit. And with every product, there's actually a responsibility, such as the functioning of it. Think of repair. Also the recycling at the end of its life. And this responsibility is currently along with the product sold to the customer. But he doesn't have all of the knowledge to carry this responsibility properly, which the manufacturer actually does, because he made it. He knows how it is made. He knows what kind of materials are used to compose it. In life, we are responsible for our own actions. so-called karmic effects. And Thomas and Sabine noticed that the responsibility currently isn't in the right place in our economy. And all of these observations they used to create a new model, Turn 2. And Turn 2 is about a circular economy. So it starts with that the manufacturer makes products and consumers use them. Then consumers bring them back to the manufacturer at the end of their lives, of the products, and the manufacturer recycles them. And in this model, the responsibility for products, of products, goes back to where it belongs. The maker, the manufacturer of the products, repair and recycling of matter. Take light, for example. You no longer buy lamps, but you rent light at Philips. They send lamps and you can use these. And does a lamp break? Responsibility of repair and renewal is for Philips. So they come to repair or renew something if necessary. This initiative has become reality at Philips, and companies now have the opportunity to purchase LAS, Light as a Service, which is done by Schiphol Airport. All of the light there is LAS from Philips. And actually Philips, how do you say that? They made a small part of the lamp on the outside, so when it breaks, they can easily repair the lamp. Yeah. But that happens when you place responsibility in its right place. So when responsibility is placed where it should be, at the manufacturer, you get a healthy flow of things. So the flow of innovation to improve products, and think of the quality of materials, easy repair, better maintainability. Waste reduction, because a lot more is repaired and recycled. And the manufacturer is also responsible for the end of life of his product. And then he has suddenly options like fully recycle, decompose and use those elements for other new products, or refurbished, such as a sort of second-hand product for a new target group, because there are a lot of people that actually are fine with having second-hand products. But all this is currently not possible because of our linear economy, and that responsibility is not in the right place. Also, the consumer becomes a user of products instead of an owner. Products are rented instead of bought. And all of this has several consequences, and let's look at those from the perspective of those three principles, so those three hypotheses. Before the break, we talked about them, and that we can use those as touchstones to check whether something is sustainable or not. I reformulated them into questions. And the first question is then, does it contribute to the living whole? So Thomas and Sabine talk about how the economy actually shows the relation people have with matter. And in the linear economy, we act like there are no natural processes. We create our own. We make, use, and waste the products and materials. We can see this as a disruptive interaction with nature. And in the circular economy, our relation with matter is redefined, more in line with the living whole we are part of. So a law of cyclicity, for example, is taken in account. We actually start to move with nature. And with repairing and recycling, we protect life. So less materials are mined, for example. An additional effect is that this model results in an identity switch of people. Because people don't own products anymore, but use them, they are stimulated to form from an outer identity to an inner identity. They used to shape their identity with possessions, such as cars or the newest telephone or mobile phone. But the attention of the user, when he's really a user, he will buy less. And it will shift to his inner identity because he has less possessions. He really turns to what he really is. It goes more, that's more about values, inner capacities, development of that inner potential. And this is already seen with some of the products because that Turn 2 model is actually put into practice. There are companies already designing their products with this economical model, so it's really fit for this current age, which is very interesting to see as well. So we actually see this shift. The second one is, does it take cyclical movement into account? So the manufacturer makes a product, and at the end of its life cycle, the product is recycled. It's a cycle. Like nature is full of cyclical processes. And irreversible cycles of processes that lock material in a certain form are out of the question. Think of bakelite. That's an old way of producing plastics. That material is really wasted because we have no way of recycling that. So that's not part of this model, which makes it sustainable. And at the moment, responsibility is moved to the actual owner, so the manufacturer. Positive things are set in motion. So the cyclical principle of cause and effect is used positively. When making products, there's now a focus on quality instead of quantity, which results in innovation on the areas of material, technology, design, and so on. And there's a lot less waste. The third principle of fundamental equality and growth, does it give life the space to contribute and develop? Due to recycling, fewer raw materials are being mined and there's less waste, which leaves more life, like trees, for example, intact to contribute to the living whole and to develop. And matter, lower life forms, are explicitly assigned identity and value. And that identity is very central subject in this whole new model. Because when matter is given identity, it ensures that matter is not overlooked and forgotten. Matter is used for buildings, matter that is used for buildings, for example, is documented in a material passport or a building passport. And when the time comes to recycle the building, all of the materials can be found with the passport exactly where they are. So the focus is also to recycle those buildings 100%. And thus matter is also treated with more respect and receives actually the opportunity to constantly contribute to that living whole. Then we go on to another example, and that is Dieter Rams. Unless there are questions, of course, please ask them. Dieter Rams worked at Braun for 42 years as an industrial designer. He's now 86 years old and retired, and he's known for the 10 principles for good design. He designed a number of well-known products, such as these. The kitchen one?
The calculator.
Oh, the calculator.
Years ago, and it's solar.
Yeah, perfect.
It's not battery, it's solar.
Wow, that's...
I know, that's the very one.
It has been a very grand inspiration for Apple, as you can see, because this is... Yeah, but this is the real one, and this is the Apple one. So it was an inspiration for John Ive. He works at Apple, and it was very much inspired by the essential approach for products and the manufacturing of them. Yeah, and he made a lot of things. He also became very famous with the record player down below to the right, because you see that plastic Perspex lid. It has a curve on the side. That plastic lid was never done before. He actually thought, well, it is very good to see where it is, where the record is at, because at some point you need to put another one in, but when it's closed, you can't see where it is at. So it's very practical and very user-based to be able to see inside there. So he made that lid, and then every record player at some point got the lid. Yeah. So these are a few examples of what he's made. And he used those 10 principles for this, and he made those at his working life at Braun for educational purposes. But before we go into those, let's look at how Dieter thinks about product design. He says that product design is a total configuration of a product, the shape, color, material, and construction. The product must serve the intended purpose efficiently. So a product is a means to reach an intended goal. And Dieter looked thoroughly at what the person wants to achieve and what functional needs there are for that to do so. And then how shape, color, material, and construction can be used to optimally support the function of the product. So usability is central to Dieter's vision. He often says, form follows function. So it's very focused, very straight, no tierlantijn, no frills whatsoever, yes. So according to Dieter, there are ultimately 10 characteristics of good design. Good design is innovative, always searching to improve the function of the product. Good design makes a product useful, aesthetic, but not aesthetic as a goal in itself, because at first when I saw this, I couldn't really think of how he meant this, but he says that when a product has the right balance to express its function, aesthetics will follow naturally. So it's not a thing in itself, but actually a balance thing. Good design makes a product understandable. Good design is unobtrusive. Products that will fulfill a purpose are not works of art, he means by that. It must leave room for the user's self-expression. Good design is honest, so it doesn't create the appearance that it is more innovative, more powerful, valuable than it actually is. Good design is long-lasting, as in timeless. Good design is thorough, down to the last detail. And good design is environmentally friendly and is as little design as possible. So it focuses on the essential aspects only. Dieter Rams says that people should express themselves and that a product must be used as a tool to do so during this process. And therefore, there should be no distraction around these products, such as that the product demands attention or that they're too confusing to use because the person has a purpose to fulfill in his life and uses product to be able to do this. So products are actually something that come with it and are like tools instead of things on their own. And he says that we need to think about what we use, how we use it, and how much we use it, or how much we use, so that we are users of products that we consciously choose and use, instead of consumers that infinitely consume products. And regarding sustainability, he says that we have to think more thoroughly about what we do, and how we do it, and why we do it. That we must dare to ask these essential questions in order to reach essential answers. And he says that we cannot afford not to be thinking about this, because all of it is connected to each other. And he also says, and that is something I find very interesting, he says that it is the task and responsibility of the designer to think carefully and essentially, because design is a reflection of ourselves. It flows out of us and carries our characteristics. So an essential mentality produces essential products. And with this concept, he actually aims at all of us, because we design everything around us, our environment, our home, of course products, but more fundamentally, we design ourselves. And with this, he shows us the responsibility that we have. Our mentality determines everything that we think and do, including all consequences, amongst others for the environment. So that means that when we focus our thinking on supporting life and gaining more insight in how to do so properly, we will propagate this, we will radiate this with our atmosphere. Okay, so we can test ourselves on sustainability in different ways. We can use these 10 design principles to test our thinking and our actions. But from a spiritual perspective, we can also use those 3 touchstones. And we can use these 3 touchstones to check ourselves afterwards on sustainability. But of course, we prefer to use them in advance to design our mentality. And by this, essentially design all that we produce. And that is where I wanted to leave this for now. But if you have questions, yes?
There is also bad design and modest design, yeah? What you
Bad
say,
design
what you want to say, there is no place anymore for these designs, other designs?
Oh, yes, there is, of course, but the best way is to design, to have a good design, sustainable design, that is in harmony with these, these touchstones or the 10 principles for good design, for example.
You not always want sustainable design. Sometimes you want to change, like for clothes. Yeah, and say, no, that one is enough. Yeah, I want now another one.
There starts the problem.
Now you're mixing up the role of the designer and the role of the consumer. Because the designer can design clothes according to these touchstones or the 10 principles. But if the consumer says, I don't care, I want to get my cheap clothing and I need my fast fashion.
Yeah, yes. It's all depending on the focus of the person. Yeah, yeah. And if we ask for other design things, products that are designed according to a certain essence, the others will start to produce them as well. It's also a demand and, how do you say that? How do you say that in English? Yeah, supply and demand, yes.
Think about fur. People wore fur all the time. Dead animal fur. And now we don't much. It's become not part of our mentality.
Yeah.
Some cultures still do, but most people for beauty don't. It's verboten, our mentality.
Yeah.
So we can change.
Yes, definitely. Are there any more questions?
I heard you wear cyclic jeans.
Yes. These are actually indeed according to the Turn 2 model. Yes, Mud Jeans creates jeans as well. That's one of the examples of the Turn 2 model in practice. Mud Jeans is a brand that produces jeans cyclically. So they actually accept old jeans for the fabric, so they can use it again to produce new ones.
Cool.
Yes. Yes.
Are you happy with your Mud Jeans?
Yes, I'm very happy with my Mud Jeans. Yes.
They fit. They don't change color. The zipper doesn't
No. Actually, because they are responsible for the quality now, right? So they have their own responsibility to produce quality products. And that really makes good products.
And you take them back when you're...
Yes, actually when they tear or whatsoever, you can just call them and they repair them. Yeah.
That's so obvious.
Yeah.
That's like a grandmother.
You can touch the fabric.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Could you go back to the slide of Turn 2 with the inner identity and the outer identity? Because what you there had with the inner identity was not totally clear to me.
Let's see. This one?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It is. This has to do with there's a shift of users owning products to being a user of products, and you don't own the product anymore, and therefore the relation with the product changes because the owner is still the manufacturer. He's the owner of the product, so you won't buy a lot of things to shape your identity, like I have the newest Apple laptop, for example, or the latest telephone or whatever. And there's a lot of less products that will circle there. And of course, you can still have a few products that perhaps shape your identity, but it will be a lot less because you just don't buy so much anymore. And there's a lot of more, there's not so much variety anymore. There are less, less various brands, or less, because, for example, also with the telephone, now you have those innovative steps, small innovative steps. Every time you have a small step of innovation which results in people buying the telephone, it will be different then. Innovation like that won't be such a thing anymore, because you just have a good product, and probably a lot of more people will have the same phone. So it's not something you can distinguish so much anymore with. That's the thing.
I get the aspect that, for example, we get away from the outer identity that I associate with the brand because I wear Nike sneakers or whatever, my jeans or whatever.
Yeah.
You may not necessarily attach identity to that. But does that necessarily lead to inner identity? That is the jump which I can't make. That's where I don't follow.
Yeah.
Right? Because, for example, right now, if I go to a second-hand store buy something, I obviously would not attach a lot of outer identity on my clothing because some of my friends might sneer at that and think, oh, you can't even afford decent clothing.
Yeah, yeah.
But what does that now say over my inner identity? That's where I don't follow.
It's just like at least what I try to say is it's not you don't focus so much on that outer identity anymore. And it's more of a result that they see happening with those companies that apply those principles of the circular thing, that people just go more inside because when the outer thing falls away, they have to distinguish themselves in a different way or something more.
Who's they?
The people, the consumers.
Or consumers?
Yes, they distinguish themselves in a different way, more with talents, for example, or what they, It's something they see happening.
Is that in one of his books? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. By the way, he has written indeed a book, Material Matters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
And that was Rams, Peter Rams, right?
No, this is Thomas Rauw.
Oh, Thomas Rauw.
Yes.
When manufacturers are the owners of the product, are you not losing all the drive for progress and development for new products? Because who's asking for that?
Well, the focus changes because the focus is more on quality than on quantity. So the quality of the products is really, it's very durable, for example, and don't break down easily. And they are already having probably the best innovation possible because there's no race anymore. You just create good products. And because the manufacturer is responsible for the product, he will also have the best innovation for it because it's in the benefit of himself, but also of the customer. So it's the race kind of dissolves.
Then still, we drive in a T-Ford, there is no asking for other cars.
We still drive in that?
A Model T Ford.
T4. Yeah.
That is giving us transport by a car.
Yeah, it's more about the usability and function than about those outer things of innovation, and all those things just disappear because there's no necessity to those anymore. The manufacturer just makes very good and essential products. It's a very different perspective.
There's really no difference, right? Because if you have the choice to rent the T-Ford compared to rent a Ferrari or something, and if they compete with each other and it's for the same price, and they just offer a far superior quality product, then you obviously would rent the Ferrari instead of the T-Ford.
But there are no Ferraris because there is no manufacturer who's going to build it.
But what I understand is because it's the manufacturers, it's to their advantage to build a more qualitative, higher product because then they have less cost because they don't have to repair all the time and just it does what it has to do. So actually right now there are, for instance with washing machines, I understood they know how to build a washing machine that just functions for a lifetime. But then they won't sell any washing machines. So what they do is just
But
one part breaks,
they're not
in 20
selling because
years.
there's always an owner of the washer.
When they
They're not
own
selling
it,
anymore.
Yeah,
When they own it, when
want
they
it to
carry
work
their
for you.
responsibility, things
Right.
change because they have to deal with their own rubbish. Yeah, yeah,
And this is functioning, right? There are
yes.
companies,
Well,
you're
yeah,
maintaining.
yeah, yeah, but different as well. Buildings are built with those material passports as well,
Yeah.
and are recycled 100%. That's the aim. And he's very he's very. Well, he says we're really going to achieve that 100%. He's really, how do you say it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Enthusiast.
They've done it. There's some buildings in Holland, right? There was
Yeah,
a company in Spain, I think, that wanted to build a round building.
Oh, that could be, yeah. He's an architect and is still very active in his buildings.
Yeah.
But he has this company called Turn2, and they help other companies creating those models.
Yeah.
For example, with Philips, for example, with Bosch, indeed, because they are thinking about doing the same. Because when Thomas told Bosch, well, what if you are responsible for your machines? Oh my, then I have to do this, and I have to change this because it breaks down in around 15 years, and so they really started to build a different machine.
Yeah. Wow.
It changes the thinking of manufacturers.
Yes,
The
very
incentives.
fundamentally.
Yeah, the
Yes.
incentives were completely different.
You didn't mention Anderson Carpet here in Holland.
No.
Are you familiar with them?
Anderson?
Anderson Carpet.
No.
They were the first one here in Holland to develop the recycling or the cyclical system.
Oh no, I didn't know.
Because you basically can rent the carpet. I mean, they went away from selling carpets. They just said, we take full responsibility for the cycle. And they changed using materials because the carpet can be 100% recycled. When you're sick and tired of your carpet or your kids spill too much stuff on there, you basically say, come on, pull the carpet back out again, take it back, bring me a new carpet.
Anderson?
Similar to my jeans. Anderson.
Anderson. No, I didn't know.
They can take the glue out,
Yeah.
they redesigned carpet. The glue was a problem, the stuff on the bottom was a problem. They changed that so that they could
Yeah, really
separate
good.
it and
Yes.
reuse it.
It's a nice example also what changes when you take the responsibility
Yes.
for your own goods.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if I understand well, you also said that actually the responsibility is always there.
Yes.
But now they feel it more.
Yes. They are actually confronted with their own things, yes.
Because otherwise it would be like karmic effects that would still be there for, whenever the chance is there to bring harmony and balance again, right?
What do you mean with that?
Well, I mean, now the manufacturers feel their responsibility, but if they don't feel it and they just...
They organize it away.
They organize it away. In essence, they're still responsible.
Yes,
right?
and there's still an effect.
From the karmic point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that these manufacturers that do that, irrespective of the company, they're in touch with the three, what do you call them, three principles.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that is where the motivation comes from. When you realize, okay, A, we don't have infinite resources, we need to care for this planet, or we can't just throw things away. I mean, there is no away anymore because it is there. That you then change on the basis of those three principles, and then you look at it differently.
Yes, it's in line with nature. So, and we actually sort of made our own design of how we go about with nature. We just made a linear process, but that's just not nature, the way nature works. Yeah.
I wonder if companies how they would react different if they were responsible for their trash. All their wasted materials, the paper that comes out of the toilet effluent, everything, like Shell.
Yeah.
Shell is going to be responsible for the products that you use, that you buy from Shell, for their targets, for their climate targets.
Yeah.
That's radical.
Yes, it's,
So if every company, if Philips had to pay by the kilo for everything that goes out of their building,
Yeah.
or if we had to, how much afhaal do you have?
yeah.
Do you put your plastic in the recycle? If not, boom, you have to pay by
Yeah.
the kilo.
Then you
Would
put,
we be different? I think so.
then you would place responsibility in its right place as
On
well.
the user, the
And you see exactly with the carpets that they changed the bottom thing in the carpet because it was not manageable to recycle and all those things.
And the glue, they couldn't.
Yeah, yeah.
It changes everything when we
Yeah.
could come up with 20 examples. What do you think?
The ideas of Thomas are very important for sustainability, but there is a question behind. That is the question, a lot of products, should we make them at all? So the fundamental question of a lot of products in our society, the first question, although we can make them sustainable, should we make them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big fat guns, for example. Big fat guns. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Because when you really apply those design principles on yourself and really think about what is essential, what do I need, then a lot of products you will probably not buy. Because when you're a conscious user of products, you consciously choose and use products. Yeah, very true.
Well, you can apply these 10 rules for lectures as well.
Yeah.
One last thing.
For what?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you rate very highly.
Yay.
Another thing is when you go on with recycling, that way, I think shops we don't need anymore. You're not going to buy something in a shop.
Yeah.
Why not?
I would want to buy in a shop.
You think we don't buy anything at all?
Yeah, not buying anything.
Yeah, but it's different. You have to go to the shop to make a renting agreement.
For example, yeah. Yeah, or for example, just to see the various products and what they can do. It's not a bad thing to have a shop, I think.
And take your jeans back.
Yeah, to have a personal.
You gotta take them somewhere.
Yeah.
It's too expensive to mail them anymore, so
Yeah.
you take them to the shop.
Yeah, true.
A good personal advice.
Take his things back.
Good personal advice.
Yeah, good personal advice. Yes, and also I mean, when these jeans, for example, they're not in many shops yet, which means you probably have to buy several of them to try them on and return all of the rest. But that is shipping costs. And they do have, because I noticed the package and it is reusable, a reusable package, reusable seal and all those kind of things. So they are doing what they can. But it does mean a lot of transport, of course. When you just have a local shop, you don't have those CO2 emissions and things and travel and shipping costs. Yeah, so I do think shops are okay.
Yeah, shoes.
Yeah, it's very specific whether it fits or not. Isn't it an idea to wrap up and then I'm still here afterwards and so are other colleagues and we can talk afterwards. Unless, of course, there are more questions that are really worth doing now. Okay. Okay, so we always end with the Gayatri mantra or the Savitar mantra, I know now that it's also called. It's a highly revered mantra from the Rig Veda, dedicated to a sun deity, which is actually our own inner sun, inner light. So, and after the mantra, we have several strokes of a gong. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds, so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity, which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light. Before all of you go, I have a few things to share with you. Because this is the last lecture of this season. Of course, next year there will be more lectures as well. But in the meanwhile, we're doing a couple of things as well, which is an international theosophy conference. The theme of this year is Theosophia, the Integral Wisdom, Returning to the Source of Science, Philosophy and Religion. This will be in July. It's in Wheaton, the USA. It's a bit far, but if you want to follow us nonetheless, you can follow us on live stream. In September, we have a symposium of which the theme is Mysticism, Leadership and Inspiration. This is a bit closer. It's in The Hague at the Babylon Hotel near Central Station. Also, we have a live stream there. And last but definitely not least is our course, Thinking Differently, which starts in October. This goes in on the thinking principles I talked about in this lecture. So if you want to dive into your thinking, know what happens there, the processes, and how you can really steer and focus your thoughts consciously, then I would really recommend doing the course. You can register on our website. Yeah, and for now, that is it. One last thing is we are all running this foundation voluntarily, so we have no paid officials or whatsoever. Of course, we do make costs by printing books, magazines, renting rooms for lectures and courses. And if you want to support our work, there's someone in the corridor with a plate on which you can put a donation. But feel free, do not feel obliged. You're totally welcome whatsoever. So have a nice Mother's Day still, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.